Well, fantastic. Loved hearing Brandon's stories. And I'm going to talk about today the intimate link between health and hydrocarbons. And I'll start off by saying congratulations for being here. This is an amazingly prosperous room by historical standards. Louis XIV would have been right at home in the Brown Palace Hotel. Even by today's standards, this is a wonderfully prosperous group here. There's billions of people in the world that aspire to have what we have. They want that too. Human well-being has always and everywhere been tied to the access and affordability of energy. Energy is the most important resource except for human resourcefulness. Fortunately, there's no practical limits on either one of them. I'll talk about those images in a second. We'll get to them. What is the greatest threat to humanity, humans, and to the environment? So a few images. I think without a doubt, the greatest threat to humanity and to the environment is poverty. Poverty. All wealthy countries have improving environments, all of them. In poor countries, poor parts of countries, that's not so. Historical context, big picture here of human energy consumption. This starts in the year 1800 because, hell, we don't know a whole lot about details of energy before then. But what we do know is human energy throughout almost all of human history has dominantly been biofuels, trees, burning trees, grass, sticks, dung. That's how we powered the world. That started to change, not at a meaningful level, until about the middle of the 1800s, where coal started to be a meaningful contributor to human energy. Coal did not arrive in time to save the forests of England. England was almost completely deforested for the start. As London built as a city, all the Sherwood forest and all the forests within reach were decimated. England's a lush, wealthy country, biologically wealthy, rich soils, wet, very, very little forest cover left in England. Coal did arrive to save a lot of the forests of Europe and the United States. Oil is the next major energy source. It's not a meaningful world contributor maybe till 1900, but its arrival, 1850s, 1860s, was in time to save the whales. Just barely. Whaling, they whaled the Atlantic to exhaustion out of Massachusetts. They whaled the Pacific and the Indian Ocean from Massachusetts and from wherever there was whaling ships. And the reason they did it was indoor clean lighting. As Brandon spoke so nicely, it's life-changing, right? You can't get a clean, easy-to-read light burning wood and burning sticks. Whale oil burns clear and less smoke, and you can read by it. Humans craved that. Kerosene arrived just in time to save the whale population. Notice the bottom is biofuels. Biofuel consumption in the world has not declined. All the other energy sources have been additive on top of that. I went to MIT specifically to work on fusion energy. I had learned in high school that oil and gas was very finite, in fact would be mostly gone by the year 2000. I wanted energy. I wanted to travel the world and climb mountains. And even as a young guy, I had a passion for poverty, or lifting people out of poverty. So I went to college to work on that problem, to work on fusion energy. That's a hard problem. Humans are ingenious and they'll get there. In graduate school, I worked on solar energy, and after graduate school, I spent a few years working on geothermal energy. I'm in favor of all sources of energy that can help human lives. The last 200 years have been simply amazing and unprecedented for humanity. I say two things I think were the dominant drivers of the creation of the modern world. One was the spread of economic liberty. 200 years ago, if you lived in the eastern United States or England, which were relatively well-off countries, we still had mercantilism. It took a majority vote of the English Parliament to give you a corporate charter if you wanted to start a business till 1842. If you wanted to start a business in eastern states, and corporate charters matter. If you want to raise capital and take risk and not go to debtor prison, you need a corporate charter. We didn't put general incorporation laws in most of our state constitutions, also until the 1840s. Some had it earlier. Once we had these things, it unleashed human ingenuity, creativity, and enterprise. But could we have done everything we do today, burning trees? Of course not. But this human ingenuity and creativity that got unleashed led to the development of these much more expansive, much denser, and ultimately much more economic fuels. Originally, coal, then oil, then gas. What are the changes in the last 200 years? 200 years ago, human life expectancy globally was 35 years. It was not clear if we had a single nation on Earth with a life expectancy of 40 years. Today, global life expectancy is 72 years. We only have arguably one nation racked by civil war with a life expectancy below 50 years. Poverty, over 90% of the world lived in extreme poverty, meaning in today's terms, less than $2 a day. Today, that's down to 10% and falling. Enormous human changes just in the last 200 years. Spread of economic liberty and the arrival of modern fossil fuels. Planes, trains, automobiles, modern medicine, and my passion, mountain climbing. There was no mountain climbing until the arrival of fossil fuels and the wealth that came from this spread of economic liberty. Response is, well, wait a minute. West is a good thing. Coal is dirty. And the question I think we always should ask is, compared to what? Brandon showed some nice photos of Nicaragua. This is too different. On the left, these are the tree people, the Kumbai, in these inland standing water forests. Most primitive people probably still alive in the world today. Their hearts and souls and their love of their children, whatever, no different than ours. The Wright is a highland tribe in New Guinea. But there's billions of people that still predominantly cook with solid biomass, burning grass, trees, sticks, and dung. This is a different lifestyle and different human impacts. So enormous progress in humanity the last 200 years. As he said, we've dropped extreme poverty from over 90% to 10%. 10% of the world is 750 million people. 4 million people die annually from indoor air pollution. That's burning solid biomass in huts. 4 million people. 7.6 million people a year die from malnourishment. 5 million die from lack of access to clean water. 1.2 million die annually from malaria. This top one, 4 million indoor air pollution. Bring liquid petroleum gas or piped natural gas, electricity, you save millions of lives. 5 million people dying from lack of access to clean water. What does a well and a pump do to that? Millions of lives. Access to energy is essential to mitigating these problems. That 1.2 million dying annually from malaria, not long ago that was 2 million. Enormous progress there. The Gates Foundation leading that effort and many others. These problems are solvable and addressable, and we made great progress. But cheap, reliable, affordable energy is necessary to save north of 15 million lives a year. Not to be too depressing, but 155 million people in the world today are stunted. 52 million wasting, meaning that they'll never grow to their genetic potential. They'll never develop brains that we have as our most important tool. They'll never fully develop those brains. 17 million severely wasting. The most important and most lethal pollutant in the world, by far, is particulate emissions. These are small things. If you can see the dust in the air, that's the big stuff. It's the little stuff, less than 2.5 microns that you breathe into your lungs, that has massive, massive impacts on human health. This is World Health Organization data. They had a conference last month on particulate pollutions as our greatest problem of emissions and pollutions in the world. This is a map of it across the countries. You see Africa's air, major problem in Africa. Why is that? One is deserts. Sahara Desert's huge. You get a lot of particulate matter from that. Deforestation, if you live off burning trees, you generate a lot of particulate matter from burning trees and from land that's now cleared. If you look at Southern Europe, South Asia, into China, there's some environmental, but that's dominantly dirty industry. Dirty ways to produce power and fuel and lives. Look at the United States. Look at the wealthy countries, United States, Canada, Northern Europe. Very, very low levels of particulate emissions. Another reason we're incredibly lucky. These are the images of my color slides. These are two images to speak to energy poverty. One is probably quite familiar. You look on the left, I think everyone recognizes the Korean Peninsula. And I'm pretty sure we get a unanimous vote. Would you rather live in the energy and greater economic liberty of South Korea or North Korea? You can see that border without a map. You can see it at night, right there in that map. The image on the right, we don't see enough. Here's the environmental impact of availability to energy. The country on the right has 7 times higher GDP and 30 times higher energy consumption than the country on the left. The country on the left, what's its largest source of energy? Oil and gas. But it has much less of it because of lack of economic liberty and poverty. So there's still a lot of people that get energy there the way all of our ancestors did, burning biofuels, burning trees. Hence, Haiti has been dramatically deforested. Evolutionary, we got lucky. We got these enormous processing brains in our heads. Some of us less lucky, but in general, humans got great brains. They had a huge amount of energy and blood flow to do that. The belief is, evolutionarily, the trade-off was we got smaller intestines. Unlike animals, we can't eat grass that's growing wildly and liberate all the energy from it. But we have to break down those long carbohydrate chains to liberate that energy. That means we have to cook our food. Even if you live in a warm place, you've got to cook your food. That's energy. Again, that picture of the island of Hispaniola, Haiti on the left, Dominican Republic on the right, you can see the border from environmental markers. Energy poverty, just to quantify it a little bit. 1 billion people in the world today, 1 billion, have no access to electricity. Another 1 billion intermittent access, an hour, a few hours a day have access to electricity. There's estimates all over the map for this, but of order 2 to 3 billion people still cook all the time or a meaningful amount of the time with traditional burning woods, charcoal, solid biomass. We know the health problems of that. It's not, so this is the poverty problem, but even in rich countries, what's going on in France right now? These huge yellow vest protests. What is everyone upset about? Increase in the cost of energy. In the United Kingdom and Germany, who have tripled the electricity prices of the United States, energy poverty is a major political problem. They need to look at that. In the United Kingdom, and now they look at these data, thousands of people freeze every winter. Unaffordability of heating their homes or heating their homes sufficiently. Even right here in Colorado, in the San Luis Valley, in Castilla, Caneos, Alamosa, and Sagaz counties, it's estimated that 25% of low-income people, primary heating fuel, wood, in our state, in Colorado. Shale revolution has helped. It's dramatically lowered the cost globally of natural gas and oil. somewhere between $1 trillion and $1.5 trillion transfer from energy producers to energy consumers. I'm an energy producer. I celebrate that fact because 99.9%, well, 100% of the world is energy consumers, and only a tiny percent of us are energy producers. Cheap energy, cheap oil and gas makes the world better, particularly for low-income people. I'm going to show this in maps now. Being a nerdy guy, a look by country. This is a map of electricity consumption per capita. Dark green is good, red is bad. You can see where countries have dramatically lower electricity than we do. To change the slide, doesn't look dramatically different. This is one measurement of malnourishment, which is under percent of the population of 5-year-olds that are underweight. That map, not wildly different than the other. The arrival of electricity, besides human health, liberates women. I'm working on a film. When you go to India and a village first gets electricity, it's women that walk miles every day to get wood, grass, sticks, and dung, and water. You bring electricity to a village, female literacy rises very quickly after that. The quality of life changes dramatically. I put up these two maps. One of these is electricity consumption per capita. One of these is malnourishment, underweight 5-year-olds. You probably can't even tell which one is which. That's how strong the correlation is. That's how strong that correlation is. Let me give one data point of this. Niger in Africa. Per capita electricity consumption in Niger is 200 times lower than it is in the United States. The health in Niger, 80 times more 5-year-olds are underweight in Niger than in the United States. What do those countries need? Energy. Let's look at a rich country, United States. This is EPA. The top one is growth in our economy. This is since 1980. Everything looks like it moves fast from 80 to 90. That's just shrinking the time scale. It's only 2 years of space in a decade. So these things are more linear lines drawn with the right time scale. The United States economy is more than 2.5 times the size it was in 1980. The vehicle miles traveled more than doubled in our country since 1980. Our population's grown 44%. Energy consumption only 25%. When you get wealthy, you invest in technologies, you become more efficient. One of the many benefits of wealth. CO2 emissions in the United States, only 12% higher than they were in 1980. But what really matters for human health is air pollution. The CDC top 6 criteria air pollutants. Particulate pollution is the biggest problem. Ground ozone, carbon monoxide, sulfur oxides, nitrogen oxides, and lead have collectively declined 67% from 1980. Pretty much a steady decline. Bjorn Lomborg wrote a nice piece, and looking at it, he says that London's air today is the cleanest it's been since 1585. Think Shakespeare and Queen Elizabeth, both early in their careers in 1585. That's what wealth brings. So it doesn't seem like it should be wildly controversial. I mean, the world should be clamoring to bring energy access to poor countries. But the clamor for that, which has been around, has been subsiding significantly. Why? Well, it's a discussion of another issue, a real issue, a meaningful issue, climate change. The reality of climate change is quite a bit different and quite a bit more positive than what you hear in the media. I'm going to talk a little bit about the recent release of the U.S. Climate Assessment Report. I'll start with a couple other, these images of progress, education spreading in India, industry and economic growth in China and India, now in Indonesia, phenomenal. We're making progress. Talking about climate change, few big picture facts up front. U.S. per capita emissions last year lower than any year in over 50 years. Despite media and political claims, I think this is the worst distortion of climate change. Extreme weather events have not increased. This is in the IPCC reports. Low confidence, they've removed that. But that got taken by politicians and media, and they run with it and beat that drum incessantly. It's not consistent with the facts. In fact, the most important issue of extreme weather events is, what does it mean for humans? Deaths, global deaths from extreme weather today are over 90% lower than they were a century ago. This has been an enormous decline in the impacts on humans from extreme weather. Not that extreme weather's declined, it's cyclical, it's not meaningfully different now than it was 100 years ago, but the human impacts have dropped dramatically. So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change builds models and they run scenarios of how much the planet will warm with the greenhouse gases we're emitting. Through the consumption of fossil fuels, we have raised CO2 in the atmosphere by a little over 40%. It does absorb infrared radiation in 2 different spectra. This leads to a warming planet. Their worst case scenario shows the planet warming by about 8 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of this century. About 2 of that has already happened. When they run their when the US Climate Assessment Report runs the economics on that, the downside of that is that by the end of this century, the US economy would be 5% smaller than it would otherwise be. Meaning that we'll be 285% the wealth we are today, as opposed to the hypothetical 300% the wealth we have today, over a century. And that scenario for the worst case warming assumes we have a massive coal renaissance, 5 times increase in coal consumption. We kind of forget where the direction we've been going, we go a different direction. But who knows the future? It can happen. William Nordhaus, Yale economist, now Nobel laureate, I would say by far the most distinguished economist looking at the climate change problem, he spends most of his time on that, estimates that if we try to achieve the Paris goals of only 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit average warming, almost 2 that have already happened, so another warming in the next 100 years similar to the last 100 years. To do that, it would cost $134 trillion in lost productivity because of changing our energy sources causes an increase in energy costs. And by his math and his models, the lost productivity significantly exceeds the mitigation of the impacts from climate change. So the cure is worse than the disease in that case. He does another case that shows a more modest goal, which is to reduce the warming at the end of the century. These are still positive feedbacks, maximum emissions, so these are still worst case scenarios. We could reduce the warming at the end of this century from instead of 7.4 degrees Fahrenheit to 6.3 degrees Fahrenheit. And this would cost $20 trillion. By his math and assumptions, the cost is less than the benefits. Maybe it makes sense. But I still think, put that in context, $20 trillion to have the temperature 6.2 degrees warmer instead of 7.4. This is the positive feedback, worst case scenario. The lower bound in the IPCC warming predictions now is 1.5 degrees Celsius, or a little less than 3 degrees Fahrenheit, 2/3 of which has already happened. So climate change is real, it has impacts, humans are driving it. But the actual impacts in the media and the news and politicians, I don't really know exactly why, get mischaracterized and exaggerated. So we should work on research, we should develop different energy technologies. I'm in favor of large investment in it. But it has taken the air out of the room of other environmental problems, and worst of all, energy access to the poor. Wrap up with my conclusions. Last 200 years, unparalleled progress in the human condition. Simply fantastic. My favorite statistic, bar none, is over the last 25 years, 130,000 people are lifted from extreme poverty every day. Every day. That's liberty and growth in energy. But we have a different challenge these days. Further human progress is now facing some headwinds from, in my view, myopic. It's an issue, but not the only issue. From a myopic, and in fact, I believe immoral myopic focus on climate change. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. This isn't a conspiracy. I think it's a misallocation of resources. My belief, particularly for low-income people, don't limit people's energy choices to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It keeps more people in poverty and harms the environment far more than climate change. Instead, we should empower people with cheap and abundant energy to save lives, forests, air quality, and water. We're making progress, we're continuing to make progress, but I find it unconscionable that the World Bank UN Development Program, which I went to China for 18 years ago, now want to restrict funding to the politically preferred energy sources. If I'm burning traditional fuels, I want LPG, I want electricity, I want anything I can do to have my kids live a longer life than I live and to have greater opportunities. Thanks for hearing me out.